On previous videos here at Tech Talk, we've been looking at the Linux operating system. And we've done a couple of different installs. We've installed Linux as a replacement to Windows. We've installed Linux on a separate drive alongside a Windows installation. Today we're looking at the third and final installation type in the trifecta. That is, we're going to be putting Linux alongside Windows on one single drive. Stay tuned, that's coming up right now here on Tech Talk. So for this installation of Linux, we're going to be putting it on a single drive alongside an existing Windows 11 installation. Now, there's a couple of things I won't be doing on this video. I'm not going to show you how to download the distribution of Linux. I've done that on previous videos. And in this video, we're going to be using Linux Mint XFCE. The other thing I'm not going to show you how to do is how to create bootable media from that download. I've showed you that on previous videos as well. I'm going to link a video up here. I'll link both videos down below. So if you're unsure of those processes, you can check out those links, because the first thing you need to do if you want to install Linux on your system is to download the version of Linux you're interested in and then create bootable media out of it. The links down below will have videos that tell you how to do that. But for this video, I've already done my download of Linux Mint XFCE. I've created bootable media out of it. I've put that here in my computer. We're ready to go ahead with the installation. So let's get started on that right now. So here we are on my Windows 11 desktop. This is a fresh installation of Windows. There's not really any data on this computer because it's just my fooling around PC. But we're on the desktop and I have my USB thumb drive with my Linux installation media plugged into a USB port, so we're ready to go. Now, the first thing we want to do when we're thinking about installing Linux, any version of Linux alongside Windows on just one drive, is we want to think about how much space on that drive we want to devote to Linux. The best way to do that is to go down into your search bar and go disk man, and we're going to get up to create and format hard disk partitions. This is the utility in Windows that tells you about the current situation of the drives that are installed on your PC. So as you can see here, there's two drives showing. Disk 0, which is the hard drive that's built into my PC, or the SSD built into my PC. And disk 1 is just my removable thumb drive that has my Linux installation media on it. So the disk we're looking at is disk 0, and you can see I've got a 200 megabyte EFI partition. That contains the boot information for the computer. We do not want to touch that. On the other end of this drive, I've got 741 megabyte Windows recovery partition. We do not want to mess with that. So the space we're looking at is the portion of the drive that has been dedicated as my C drive with 237 gigabytes of space on it. Now, if we look up here, we look at the C drive under volumes, it says I've got 237 gigabyte capacity in that partition, and I've got 188.58 gigabytes of free space. So the free space is what we're looking at being able to use for Linux. Now, I'm not using this computer for anything, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a Linux partition of 100 gigabytes. And I just want to keep that in mind, because as we go through the installation process, we're going to need to know that information, remember how much space we want to use for Linux. Now, your space that you choose may be different. If you've got a whole bunch of stuff on Windows, you've got photos, you've got videos, you've got music, you may need to leave a lot more space than that. Maybe you've got a 2 terabyte hard drive and you just want to devote 200 gigabytes to Linux for fooling around. You can totally do that. But keep in mind, whatever space you leave for Windows, whatever space you use for Linux will dictate how much you're able to save in each of those partitions going down the road. So for Linux, it typically doesn't take a lot of space. You can run, a Linux operating system in maybe 16, 32 gigabytes, whatever. It doesn't take a whole lot. A lot of installations are 8 gigabytes and less. But you still want to save room for installing applications, for saving media, and all the things you might want to do in that Linux partition. But because this is a test PC, I'm just going to use 100 gigabytes for Linux. That'll leave me 188. Well, it's going to leave me 137 for Windows. I don't use this computer anyway, it doesn't matter. So now that we know how much space we want for Linux, let's go and we're going to restart our PC. And the first thing I have to do is I have to go into BIOS, which will allow me to set my boot order so that we boot from that thumb drive. So let's go ahead and restart. And on this computer, I hit delete to access BIOS. So we're going to do that right now. I always like to pound away on delete as soon as I see a black screen, because sometimes these splashes go pretty fast. There we go. Okay, so there's a couple of things I've already done in here that I know this PC already has on it for boot options. So the first thing I want to do, I'm going to go up here to boot configuration, and my fast boot is disabled. If you're going to run Windows and Linux on your computer together, you always want to have fast boot disabled. You're going to need to have it disabled in order to select which operating system you want to boot at startup going forward. So that should always be off. Now, one that's a little bit has a little bit of controversy is Secure Boot. A lot of folks say you should always turn Secure Boot off when you're installing Linux. Other folks say, no, a lot of Linux distributions are Secure Boot capable. The one I'm installing, Linux Mint XFCE, is compatible with Secure Boot. I know sometimes Secure Boot can cause issues with Linux distributions. What I'm going to do this time, I'm leaving my Secure Boot on. As you can see, I've already got it set up, but I'm just going to see what happens if we have any glitches or if it, works out okay at install time. So I'm going to leave that on just for the heck of it to sort of, see what happens. So we've got Secure Boot on, we've got Fast Boot off. My boot order now, I'm going to say I want to boot from my USB flash disk. And I'm going to go exit, save changes and reset. Now, with any luck, we'll be starting into our Windows Mint, or Linux Mint installation media. There we go. So what we are going to do is we are going to just start Linux Mint 22.2 XFCE. And here it comes. Now keep in mind, whenever you're installing Linux, what we do at this step, we're not actually installing Linux. It's just loading the Linux Mint operating system into memory on the PC. So the computer will be running the operating system until I tell it to actually do an install. So at this point, the install isn't actually happening. We're just loading up that operating system and using it out of memory. Okay, and now here we are at our Linux Mint desktop. And you can see the first thing that we see up here in the upper left is our icon to go ahead and install Mint. So let's go ahead and do that. And we want English, which is fine, so we'll hit continue. English US keyboard. We're going to install multimedia codecs because that can help down the road. I'm going to put in a secure boot password here. Apparently it needs at least 8 characters, so there we go. So now you can see we've got a couple of different options here. It says install Linux Mint alongside Windows Boot Manager, or erase disk and install Linux Mint, or something else. The something else is for more advanced folks that want to customize exactly where all their folders go and how the partitions are made up. Erasing disk and installing Mint does just that. It'll get rid of my Windows installation and it'll install Linux Mint over top, so I won't be able to use Windows anymore. So the one we want here is install Linux Mint alongside Windows Boot Manager. Now here we go. This is where we go about partitioning our drive. So what we can see, we've got a recommendation that pops up, and funnily enough, it's pretty much what I was going to do anyway. So it's telling me that on my drive, I can have 154.5 gigabytes devoted to Windows, and I can have Mint taking up 100. Now, what's going to happen is when we do the install, the installation media is going to do the partitioning for me. So it's going to shrink down that C drive partition. It's going to build a partition for Linux Mint beside it. So it's going to adjust the space on my drive for both Windows and the space that I need for Linux. And I can adjust this by simply dragging the divider. So if I go this way, I'm leaving less space for Linux Mint, more for Windows. If I come back here, now it's less for Windows, more for Linux. So I'm going to do exactly what I said. I'm going to shoot for about 100 gigabytes here. There we go. And that's pretty much how I want it. This really couldn't be simpler. It's a very, very simple interface, which I like. Setting up your own partitions is far more complicated than this. So if you're a newer user, you're newer to installing Linux, this is kind of the way to go for simplicity. So let's go ahead and say install now. And then we'll hit continue. And it's going to go ahead and do its job in creating the partitions that we need and readjusting things on my drive to fit Linux in. Okay, now it's asking me for my time zone. I've got to put in my computer information and my information. Okay, so I've got a username, I've got my computer's name, my name, and I've put in a password. I always say require my password to log in. It's just a good idea for security. Plus, when you first start Linux, it facilitates things when it comes to a password for installing applications, etc. later. It just makes that the default password and it stores it in the password store so that every time when you're installing software, you're making changes to the computer that require authentication, you'll be using that same password. So for me, it just makes it a little bit easier once this is installed. Okay, so at the end of all that, this is the screen that you see. It says that the installation is complete. It says it wants to restart the computer now, so let's go ahead and restart. And now it asks us to remove the installation medium, which we'll do, and press enter. And what's going to happen, because we've set up basically a dual boot system, when this reboots, we're going to see a screen that says, do we want to start Linux Mint, or do we want to start into Windows? And that gives the option of starting whatever we want. Now, I just want to talk about this screen for a moment. This screen will only show up if you have Secure Boot enabled on your computer. Remember earlier on when we were looking at the BIOS, I left Secure Boot on when I did this installation. So now this screen is asking us to install the keys that we need in order to use Secure Boot. Now you're going to notice on this installation, I skipped over it because I won't actually be using this Linux installation on this PC. But if you've got Secure Boot on your PC, you're going to, at this screen, want to select Enroll MOK. On the next screen, you're going to want to hit Continue. On the following screen, you hit Yes. Now you'll be prompted to enter a password, and that is the Secure Boot password that we entered earlier on in the installation process. So enter your Secure Boot password and then hit Restart, and your computer will be all set and your Linux will be using Secure Boot effectively. That's all you need to do. So we're going to continue to boot. And as you can see here, we've got Windows Boot Manager or Linux Mint 22. So we're going to select Linux Mint. And give that a second to start. And there we go. So I'm going to sign in now. Oops, after I turn my numlock on. There we go, third time's the charm. And one of the things that I always do when I install a new operating system, one of the first things I do is I go and install the updates. Now, I had a viewer ask me a little while ago, why do you install updates? You've just downloaded this operating system, you've just installed it, why does it need to be updated? Well, the reality of it is, when you're developing a system like this, like Linux Mint, when you update the operating system, you're going to do updates here and there. You're going to do quality improvements, security updates, etc. You don't want to have to recompile the installation media, re-upload it to the website every time you do that. The expectation is that the end user is going to download the installation media, they're going to install, and then they're going to catch any updates by running the updater at the time of install. So whatever you download installation media from a website, you know it's rarely going to be as up-to-date as a running copy of that operating system will be. So let's go ahead then and open our application for updating our software. So we're going to type in update, go to Update Manager, hit OK. And first thing it wants to do is update the Update Manager itself. So let's apply that. There we go. We're going to switch to a local mirror because that can make it a little bit faster to get updates. So we'll hit yes. And I'm in Canada, so I'm going to pick a Canadian mirror. Let's go with that one. Let's see what we have for this one here. Ooh. Okay, let's take that one. Okay, so I've got my mirrors updated. Now, these are all the different things that are available to update on this PC with this installation of Linux Mint. So we're going to keep everything checked off. We're just going to go install updates, and it's going to go ahead and look after all those updates for us. Okay, so we sped that up a little bit, but that's basically what it takes to get the software updated. Once it's updated, of course, it wants to restart, so let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and here we are back to our boot options. So we're going to select Linux Mint 22.2. And there we go. We're back to our desktop. So I'll put in my password. And now we've got a fully installed version of Linux Mint XFCE. Everything's up to date. Now we can start installing our applications. We can start saving files, doing whatever we want with it. We're good to go, all on a single disk. Now let's take a look at what that actually looks like on the disk. So we're going to go to Disks, which shows us information about our drive. And here you can see how the disk has now been partitioned. The important part is here, this partition 3, 155 gigabytes, is now my Windows partition. And this partition 5, the 100 gigabytes ext4, is what I've set aside for Linux, for Mint. So let's close that off. Let's restart, and let's look at the exact same thing now from the Windows side. So we are going to go to Restart. And let's go down to Windows Boot Manager, which will now start Windows. So there you go. There's my Windows installation. So let's log in. Let's go to Disk Manager. And now here's what that looks like now. So just as you saw in Linux, it's the exact same thing, but if you're a little more familiar working in Windows, this might look a little more familiar to you. But this is how our disk is partitioned now. So everything on the Windows side is as it was. We've just got the 100 gigabyte partition now for Linux. And if you're wondering why it shows, like this shows 93.41 gigabytes here. It shows 100 gigabytes in Linux. It's because Linux and Windows, they measure gigabytes slightly differently. So you often see variations in sizes that way, but really it's representing the same thing. So as far as Windows is concerned, nothing's changed. We've just given up some of its space to devote now to Linux. It's operating just fine. We've got both OSs running side by side, and that's how you go about doing a dual boot Windows Linux setup on a PC with just one drive. I hope you found that helpful. Feel free to leave your comments down below. If you've got questions, comments, you've got suggestions how to do this better, always happy to hear those. Again, I'm Graham Hughes. This is Tech Talk. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.